Right. So, in the last lesson we studied for revision, right, in Unit 1. If you guys remember, I mentioned something about a tour. I told you all that you're, by studying political science, what you are doing is going a tour, a field trip to this beautiful mansion called political science. Okay. So, I told you last week in the last revision class what we did was sort of like taking a walk towards this mansion and sort of like explaining to you um, who who founded this this mansion, who built the walls, and who sort of like um, what who were the important people who are significant in developing this mansion. And then we saw the approaches, what were the doors we had to we had available to enter this subject. Okay. So now that we have entered the mansion, if you guys have visited those what do you call museums and stuff, you all must have seen like a small map. You have like a small map where you have like it says this way is this place is this place is that, this is room number 5, it has this, room number 6 this has this, room number 10 this has that, second floor you have this. It's like sort of like a map that gives you an idea the moment you enter the museum. So we are in front of something like this. We are in front of this map that explains what you have in this mansion of political science. We've entered this mansion of political science, so let's find out what do we have there. Okay, so which is why this lesson is called political science in subfield. So this is basically like the scope of political science. That's the idea behind that, right? So what we study in this, you can see political philosophy and the origin of the subject, political idealist theories, then political institutions, right? Then the other recent developments. Okay, right. Okay. So just you can read it with me. Political science can be interpreted as the subject that studies the political system in the society in a professional manner. In other words, political science is the subject that studies the political system in the society in a scientific perspective. Okay. Professional politics have a long history which runs up to the Greek era. The initial stage of political science was based on simply studying Greek city-states. Remember, this is related to the last lesson. However, political studies have been evolved nearly for more than 24 centuries. And during this time period, the subject area of political science has developed and evolved into many areas. So this is the map I told you about. This is what you need to study about political science. This is a basic idea of what is the scope of political science. Okay. So if you have the printed note in hand, you can actually mark this last three, put a collective bracket to last three, and you can write these are recent developments of the subject, right? So the classic development of the subject comes down to these five. So I have left a small box open here for you to sort of like put a sketch, small sketch. What do you need to put there? There is a way that this subject is being developed. Okay. First, you have political philosophy. What is political philosophy? Do you remember what is political philosophy? You ask fundamental questions and you try to clarify answers. And when you are clarifying answers, it clarifies concepts related to that question. Then in the end, you develop normative goals like value-based judgments, right? That's what you used to do in philosophical approach, right? Because that's what you do in philosophy. So political philosophy also starts like that. So when you read that note, you'll understand it's pretty much like very much connected to the philosophical approach we studied. This is the origin of the subject, political philosophy, right? So political philosophy creates political ideology. Political ideology creates political theory creates political institutes, and then that creates comparative politics. How does that work? Political philosophy is thinking, right? Political philosophy is thinking about fundamental questions, as we discussed before, right? So then what happens when people keep thinking? People come up with good ideas, very solid ideas. And when these solid ideas sort of develop into like mega ideas, bigger ideas, reasonable, influential ideas, they become ideologies. They become certain ideas that can shape how we think, change how we think, unite people together. Those are called political ideologies. How did it get there? Political philosophy, people think, right? People think in political philosophy. In political, then when people think, They come up with ideas which become political ideologies. Some of those ideas become political ideologies like socialism, nationalism, liberalism, fascism, whatnot. Then, then what happens? Based on these political ideologies, political scientists develop political theories. Then there are some normative theories and scientific theories. Normative means like the value-based theories, what is good, what is bad, and scientific theories which are based on facts, right? Then based on those political theories, people develop political institutions, political institutes, right? Like all around us, we see political institutes like state and government, political parties, pressure groups. All these things are political institutes. These things are developed based on those political theories that were developed before. Then what happens that when you have several political institutes, several political theories, several political ideologies existing, you take them and you comparatively study those, right? That is the structure of political science. That's how political science was evolved all this time. Political philosophy got people thinking, and when we people are thinking, they came up with ideas which eventually created political ideologies, right? And based on political ideologies, political scientists develop political theories, and based on political theories and that guidance, people develop political institutions, and people have been studying these political institutions in a comparative approach, that comparative politics, right? So the box is there for you to put a sketch of that in a way you remember. I don't know, maybe you can think, you can just write political philosophy, people thinking about fundamental politics, or just draw a picture of a person thinking, I don't know, whatever that works for you, right? So that box is your space. I've left it empty for you all to put it in a way that you all understand. Okay, that is explanation. Okay, right. So if you all want, you all can do it after the class. Right? Then there is the political philosophy. Now this is, as I said, if you have studied philosophical approach from last class, this is going to be very similar to that. Okay, so not going to necessarily read this note because there is a revision, but if you are reading at home, this is an extensive note, right? It's extended. Everything is included here. Just reading the bold features, there are bold sentences. Through political philosophy, many concepts that are used in political philosophy are explained. Then you basically ask and you try to find answers for fundamental political questions. Okay, these are the questions, the examples, like what is the current status of the world? What is the ultimate truth about human? That's what you used to do in philosophy, and political science used to be a part of philosophy. And in the end, what you do, you propose normative goals, right? What is right and what is wrong? What is fair and what is unfair, and so forth. Okay. Then of course, when you ask fundamental questions and when you develop normative goals, these kind of concepts get some light: justice, equity, rights, liberty, etc. Okay. Then of course there is a table of, like, when it comes to each theme, each basic fundamental theme, these were the most notable names that can be considered as important. You don't need to memorize all of them, and especially don't, like, if you are new to the subject, don't just torture yourself trying to memorize all these names, because most of these names you will find in the remaining part of the syllabus and you will be familiar with those names either ways. Okay. And then of course, behavioralism came, and behavioralism sort of changed. Basically, this is like a reflection of the first lesson itself. Okay. Right. So I'm not going to read this part. It's not a theory class, right? In theory class, we've already covered this part. Okay. But of course, you are welcome to read this on your own and ask me if you have any questions. Or if you want theoretical support in this class, let me know. I can put you in the junior class. If I'm doing this lesson with the juniors batch, I will get you all to take part in that class and get it covered. Okay. So this is John Rawls. He's a he's someone, he's the person who sort of like brought back political philosophy, because behavioralists sort of looked down on philosophy. You guys know that, philosophical approach. We studied that behavioralists sort of like had a problem with that. It was John Rawls, and this book of Theory of Justice is what brought back political philosophy back into the spotlight it deserves. So what happened when people got thinking? Political philosophy got people thinking. Then what happened? People ended up coming up with ideas, and some of these ideas became ideologies. Okay. So in general, what are the common features of ideologies. These are the common features of ideologies. If you have the printed note, highlight these. Right? Being consisted of a cohesive set of ideas. Right? Being capable of shaping and adjusting a political consciousness, political beliefs, and perspectives of various sections of the society. They can change how we think. They can change how we look at certain things. Right? Being capable of guiding sections of the society for political actions. Right? You know, people sometimes go out, you know, they give a they risk their lives, sometimes they sacrifice their lives to bring political change. You see these revolutions, and all these political movements sometimes which cause your death. But how do you think they got that motivation to go there? It's because there was a political ideology that they followed, and that sort of like gave them the strength to pursue what they want. Like, you know, it is capable of guiding sections uh, of the society for certain political actions. Okay, right. Then you have a couple of examples for political ideologies, right? There are, like, you know, you can write an entire book with all these political ideologies, just a list which would run up to the extent of a book. You have that many political ideologies in the world at the moment, but you know, they've given like the most important ones: liberalism, socialism, nationalism, social democracy, uh, fascism, welfare state, liberalism, and so forth. Okay, and out of these, you have 8 ideologies to study in Unit 5. And here they have briefly discussed what liberalism is, they have briefly discussed what socialism is, and they have briefly discussed what nationalism is. Now, again, since this is a revision class, I don't go into that much of details. And if you read this note and you don't understand, that's fine, because all these 3 ideologies are extensively taught, elaboratedly taught in Unit 5, okay, in much more detail. So if it doesn't make much sense by you reading it by now, that's fine. Unit 5 will clarify all the doubts you have. Okay, so basically you just need to have an idea what an ideology is. Then political theory. Okay, political theories are basically theories. What do? They explain the social phenomena we have around our society, right? Now, objects falling onto the ground fall at the same speed. This is a natural phenomenon that is explained by the theory of gravity in physics. So you can see when you drop 2 things, when you drop a hammer and a ball, right? Those 2 things fall onto the ground at the same time, same speed, and that's because the gravitational pull is 9.8 meters per second, right? So that is explained by the theory of gravity, theory of gravitation in physics. So it explains how that scenario happens. Why do things fall onto Earth, onto the ground, and why do things fall at the same speed? Then when goods are rare in a market, the prices go up accordingly. This is a social phenomenon that is explained by the demand and supply theory in economics. So this is an economic scenario that is explained, and the theory explains how that happens. Okay, so when social and economic transformations lead certain social groups into conflicts, this social phenomena can be explained in political science under the theory of relative deprivation. So, you can see even the 4th one, right? So the reason behind the different governments following different foreign policies in post-independent Sri Lanka can be explained in the theory of realism and national desires. So all these scenarios you see, all these phenomena you see, can be explained, whether it's a natural phenomenon or a social phenomenon. It always can be explained by theories. So much so we call these theories a window to look out at the world, right? So it's like if you are inside a house, you don't know what's happening outside your house, right? So when you go outside, when you go near a window, you can see what's happening outside. So what a theory does is, like, you know, our life is like a house. We are living in a house. We only see the things that are relevant to our lives. So a theory is like a window where it gives you a better view of like what's happening outside. Okay, so these political scientists are the ones who discover these windows. They find these windows and they tell us, you know, here I found a window. Please come, take a look outside. Okay. And of course, these theories have 2 types of theories: one normative theories and one scientific theories. Normative means the value-based ones, of course, as the philosophical people suggested, and the other one, of course, scientific theories, as the behaviorists suggest, that are going based on facts. Okay, so these three I went really fast because that's pretty much what we studied before, and you don't necessarily get essay questions from this area per se. In the second unit, the most important part is like the political ideologies, which actually come a little later. Okay, so we need to get through this part soon. Okay, right. Any of you all have the PDF of this file? Any of you all have the PDF of this file open? Okay, never mind. It's okay. We'll get someone to read. Okay, we'll get someone to read. That's fine. I can use. Right, Niruni, can you read the note? Right, it's okay. Like I initially thought not to read this because it's a revision, but we can read it once, like all the parts we explained, just to refresh, and we can move on to the next part. Okay, read from political philosophy onwards.
So give me a second, sir. I can't see the screen. I have to refresh the page. Give me a second.
Oh, yeah, sure. Shall I get someone else, or are you having trouble?
Political philosophy. Political philosophy is one of the most important areas in political science. Philosophy is considered as the parent subject of political science, and throughout the history, political science shows a closer attachment with philosophy. In subject philosophy, the world is defined. In other words, philosophy is an attempt to understand the nature of the world. Therefore, the main purpose of philosophy is to look for answers for the question, is it possible to know the world? Based on this foundation, different groups of philosophers have provided different philosophies. These philosophers are relevant to politics, since most of the questions that are asked in philosophy are relevant to politics as well. Also, these philosophies focused on many fundamental political questions and search for answers. These philosophers were specifically known as political philosophers. Political philosophers can be interpreted under three main themes. Through political philosophy, many concepts that are used in political analysis are explained. In order to analyze politics, it is necessary to use fundamental concepts. Political philosophy does an important job by clarifying the meaning of these key concepts. Example: state government, citizenship, equality, freedom, justice, power, sovereignty, rights. Asking and finding answers to fundamental political questions. Since the fundamental feature of philosophy is to ask questions, in political philosophy also fundamental political questions are asked. Political philosophers search for answers for the questions that are raised by themselves, such as what is the current status of the world, what is the ultimate truth of the human about the human, what is the fundamental status of the world, what is justice, how does the world function. Proposing normative goals. One of the unique features of philosophy is the close connection it has with the subject ethics. Therefore, philosophers have attempted to interpret social elements as right and wrong according to ethics. This includes social elements receiving an ethical value, and judging these ethical values is known as normative goals. Therefore, political philosophers apply normative goals to fundamental politics concepts such as political activities, political institutes, state policy formation. Political philosophy has been systematically developed and evolved since the Greek era up to date. Therefore, the subject, which was founded by Aristotle, has been covering more and more new territory throughout the history. The subject area of political science has given attention to the following important elements: justice, equity, rights, liberty, equality, liberation. Above mentioned elements of political science have been discussed by philosophers during the Greek, Roman, and medieval eras. However, these In these early eras, these elements seem to lack a common stand. In the modern era, many more political philosophers have discussed these elements in a more organized manner. As a subject, philosophy had a prestigious position in political science until the 19th century. However, during the 20th century, political philosophy suffered a setback due to the rise of behavioralism. The foundation of political philosophy was mainly focused on searching for answers and normative goals. The behavioralist political scientists came up with a more empirical, fact-based, and a scientific version of political science. However, during 1970s, behavioralism faced a setback. This shift began with the book A Theory of Justice by John Rawls. This book discussed the importance of political philosophy, which inspired political scientists to bring back political philosophy. Political ideologies. Political ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, etc., are considered as important areas of political science. A political ideology can be defined as a set of political ideas that influence politics in a society, guide political actions, and has a capacity to attract followers to follow its beliefs, visions, and principles. In modern context, political movements and political parties are given the theoretical guidance by political ideologies. In general, a political ideology has following features: being consisted of a cohesive set of ideas, being capable of shaping and adjusting a political consciousness, political beliefs and perspectives of various sections of the society, being capable of guiding sections of the society for political actions. The main political ideologies that are consisted of above features are as follows: liberalism, socialism, nationalism, social democracy, fascism, welfare state, neoliberalism, democracy. Some of the above ideologies can be briefly explained as follows. Liberalism. The concept of liberalism is based on the fundamental idea of individual freedom. Liberalism believes that the individual freedom and individual autonomy as the cornerstone of liberalism. The freedom of society as a whole is consisted of freedom in economic, social, political, and cultural domains. The rise of liberalism is closely connected to the rise of capitalism. The economic theory of capitalism acts as the conceptual comparison for the political concept of liberalism. Other than the rise of capitalism, there are many other reasons behind the birth of liberalism. The fall of feudalism, the Industrial Revolution, scientific discoveries, heliocentric theory, geographical discoveries, South and North American, Australian continents, Protestant religion reforms, Muslim invasions, the development of currency exchange, circulation of money became more common. The liberal political theory was in fact created in order to support the economy of capitalism. The capitalistic economy theory is based on the idea of a free market. This theory required a political theory that was compatible. Therefore, liberalism was created since it was an ideal political foundation for the free market. Liberalism features a government that governs less, which supported the free market theory. In the initial period, this idea was applied in an extreme level, where the government simply limited their tasks to protecting law and order and nothing else. These liberal principles were quite parallel with the fundamental features of democracy. Therefore, governments that applied liberal theory were recognized as liberal democratic governments. Liberalism as a political ideology has provided major contributions to change the shape of many political institutes, principles, and political parties. Example 1. Institutions: parliament, political parties, mass media, judiciary, etc. Principles: individual freedom, separation of powers, rule of law, checks and balances, fundamental rights. 3. Political practices: free and fair elections, duties of the government, separation of religion and state, limits to political power, etc. Socialism. Socialism originated in Europe during the 19th century as a general political theory and was later evolved into an influential political ideology by the early 20th century. Socialism includes both a political theory and an economic theory which provides an alternative for liberalism and capitalism. As a socialist, As a political ideology, socialism mainly focuses on the basic idea of absolute equality. This includes equal ownership of property. This is known as a public property system. In general, socialism is a collection of many political ideologies that focuses on creating a social equality and equity. The concept of communism was developed by Karl Marx. This concept provided a much more effective and radical version of socialism. Basically, Karl Marx provided an organized criticism of capitalism and class difference. Also, Marx believes that an equal society can only be built by overthrowing the capitalistic system. This way, the working majority becomes the ruler through a social revolution in order to create a society without a class difference. As a political ideology, socialism has contributed to politics in the 20th century. These contributions can mainly be summarized under four features: presenting itself as a powerful alternative to the liberal ideology and providing alternatives to the sub-concept of liberalism, such as freedom, equality, social emancipation. 2. Advancing the vision of socialism as an alternative to liberal democracy. 3. Presenting a radical critique of explanation, social oppression, and social inequalities. Since liberalism had above weaknesses, socialism criticized them radically. 4. Socialism remaining as a powerful political ideology that provided a vision and guidance to mass movements in everywhere around the world, initially in Europe, later outside Europe. Nationalism. Nationalism is one of the important ideologies in political science which initially came to the spotlight during the 20th century. The ideology of nationalism is strongly connected to the evolution of state. With the fall of feudalism, the format of the state was transferred into nations where each nation was a state. In basic terms, a state was a group of individuals living in the same territory with a sovereignty power who identified themselves as one national unit. Initially, a national unit shared a common language, common religion, a common culture, etc. However, in recent times, due to immigration and other reasons, nation states seem to have multi ethnic backgrounds where many languages, many religions, and many cultures are shared by the members of the same nation. This multi ethnicity was the very reason behind the development of nationalism as a political ideology. Members of a nation state were identified as a political community who possessed the right to their state as citizens. This idea was developed under the name nationalism as a political ideology that helped to maintain the unity among members of a nation who belong to different ethnicities. As a modern political ideology, nationalism was initially emerged in the 19th century Europe. Subsequently, by the mid 20th century, it went into Asian, African, and Latin American continents. In general, the political idea of nationalism can be summarized as follows. 1. It is nationalism as a political ideology that enables communities with shared cultures or linguistic identities to imagine themselves as distinct political communities as nations. Language, religions, culture, and the territory are the identities through which communities imagine themselves to be a nation as a political community. 2. The modern nation state is essentially constructed within the framework advanced by nationalism. It basically believes that each nation has a right to form its own political unit. This also means that modern nation states should be politically homogeneous despite linguistical cultural diversity.
Okay. So can you read political theory? Sarah, are you in this class?
Yeah.
Yes, political theory, please.
Political theory. Political theory can be considered as one of the main areas of the field of political science. Political theory is quite important to define political phenomena in the society. Following examples explain how a theory can explain a phenomenon. Examples: object falling at the ground fall at the same speed. This is a natural phenomenon that is explained by the theory of gravity in physics. When goods are rare in a market, the prices go up accordingly. This is a social phenomenon that is explained by demand and supply theory in economics. When social and economic transformations lead certain social groups into conflicts, this social phenomenon can be explained in political science under the theory of relative depri- deprivi- deprivation. The reason behind different governments following different foreign policies in post-independent Sri Lanka can be explained with the theory of realism or natural desires. Therefore, it can be seen that the theory defines the entire phenomena instead of defining elements one by one. In other words, the political theory is an instrument used by political scientists to explain a political phenomenon. In a science, natural or social, the general task is to gather and comprehend knowledge. Therefore, this should happen in a theoretical foundation. A theory is a representation of how we see the world. Therefore, a theory is a window to see the world. The world is an unorganized, complex entity. Under this complexity, the world can only be properly understood with the guidance of a theoretical approach developed by political scientists. In political science, a theory has two definitions: normative theory and scientific theory. Normative theory. This is usually identified with political thought and philosophy. This originated in ancient Greece with the contributions by Aristotle, Plato, etc., and still continues to be important in modern political science as well. The best feature of this theory is the commitment to propose better alternatives in politics. This includes a better state, better system of governance, better public policies, a better position for the citizens, better rights and liberty. These proposals are based on value judgments and ethical considerations. Therefore, the concept of normative political theory has two objectives: to politically imagine better political alternatives, to practically prescribe those proposed alternatives. Therefore, it can be said that political theory is both critical and prescriptive in the normative form. Influential names in normative political theory: John Rawls, Theory of Justice; Philip Pettit, Theory of Republican Freedom; Jurgen Habermas, Theory of Public Sphere. Scientific theory. The idea of scientific theory is opposed to the traditional normative theory, is considered as much more recent. This theory came into spotlight with the rise of behaviorism. By 1930s, social scientists were inspired with the methods that were used in natural sciences. When social scientists applied these natural scientific methods, they were known as scientific terms in the study of social sciences. The term scientific in political science has the same meaning as natural sciences. Therefore, the task of scientific theory is to explain why things occur. Similar to natural sciences, in political science also it is explained why political phenomena occur in accordance with a law such as regularity. Developing a political theory scientifically is basically discovering such laws. When social and political scientists develop such laws by engaging in research, it is known as a theoretical system. Scientific theories are different from normative theories. Basically, in one fundamental aspect, scientific theories are known as empirical theories since they are based on empirical era and evidence. Although normative theories do employ evidence, they are mostly reflected on personal belief and value judgment. The tradition of scientific theory in political science is called positive political science. In this way, positivist is another term of expressing implicit in modern political science, the theory of political modernization, theory of political systems, the theories of behaviorism are developed as scientific and positivist theories. Conclusion: the modern political theories consisted of both normative and scientific theories. There are several political theories that are consisted of both: liberal political theory, Republican political theory, Marxist political theory, post-Marxist political theory, theory of political modernization, postmodern political theory, post-colonial political theory, feminist political theory. Therefore, it can be seen that theory represents the window to see the meaning of the world. Since the world is unorganized, complex, and mixed up, it is important to have a proper window to witness the world with clarity. Science has many such windows. Scientists who are near each window invite us to walk up to that window and to have a better vision of the world.
Right. Thanks, sir. So you can see that there are uh, two types of theories, right? You have scientific theories and normative theories. So scientific theories are the ones you go with fact based, Normative theories are the ones you go with like values. So you know that we studied this under approaches. So those are the ones normally go like, normally associated with the philosophical approach people are the normative values, value-based judgments, normative goals, and the scientific ones are the ones introduced by the behavioralists. So in conclusion, what was there? In today's context, we use both, right? In today's context, for theories to be very effective, they sort of needs to be like, what do you call, um, part normative and part scientific. Okay, right now we are moving on to the important part. Now here's the thing. Now of course you can see that we actually finished this part quite fast, right? We can quickly finish this part because we need to move on to the important parts where you discuss about political institutions. That's the most important part where you actually get questions from for the exam, right? So this part I had to go fast because again it's a revision class, a quick revision of like 2 hours, the entire unit. So because of that, I hope that reading the note once, I thought of reading the note now because it's unlikely that you guys would read it after the class. I know you don't have the motivation, so I was like, read it. Didn't want to read it. I didn't have time allocated to read that note, but I read it. I got told to read it in the class itself because it's most likely that you might not read it later. Okay. And if you don't understand most of the stuff that you see in this lesson, do not worry. If you look at this note after finishing the syllabus, it will make tons of sense to you because you will know what liberalism is, you will know what socialism is, and you'll be more familiar with like behavioralists, you'll be more familiar with the philosophical. So that way you'll understand more. Okay. And of course, you have the other option. On Sundays, I have my 2022 class, right? 2022 class. For that, I can let you in. And there I'm going in the normal theory pace, okay? Because those kids actually have time. Right. So we are moving on to the important parts now. Political institutions. So we saw people were asking fundamental questions under political philosophy. Then they were coming up with ideas, which eventually turned into ideologies, right? Then, of course, we saw that how those were developing political theories, that like scientific and normative theories, which are like windows for us to look out the world, how those theories explain what's happening around us, scenarios explaining, right? Now, of course, based on these theories, people develop political institutions, right? Before moving on to political institutions, you need to understand, before moving on to details of political institutions, we need to be familiar with what political institutions are, okay? So let's take a look at the note here, okay? So political institutions, just read, you can read it with me, this part, it's no problem. In political society, the element of politics is structured with institutes. Therefore, studying political science requires a thorough understanding of these institutes, right? Studying political science, we focus on political institutions, mainly since politics itself is an institutionalized in a variety of ways. So the political system that is around us is based on these political institutions, which is why this is really important, okay? Most political parties and processes have been developed around political institutions. When we study institutions, it can be seen that there are laws and regulations, practices and ethical standards associated with them. And they have also specified purposes and objectives. Institutions in society can be classified into two. So there are two types. There are two types of political institutes. Two types. What are the two types? You have formal institutes and you have informal political institutes. Okay. What is the difference between these two? Formal institute means, like, of course, it's spelled out there, right? Spelled out there. They are established and governed by formal laws, rules, regulations. Mostly, those are tangible and visible as they have buildings, premises, and personnel. So you take school, university, the parliament, municipal council, administrative officers, provincial councils, minister officers, departments, government places, police, right? All these places, they are tangible. They have buildings, they have headquarters, they have premises, there are personnel who's in charge of those things, right? And they are governed by certain laws, there are rules and regulations. So these are formal institutes, the institutes that you can actually see, okay? Then you have informal institutions, right? These exist in society conceptually, rather than materially. They exist in our heads. We don't really see those, right? And these are not visible, tangible. However, despite that, we constantly encounter them. See, family, right? Like family, of course, you all have a house. That's different. But like the family doesn't have like a headquarters. You don't have a headquarters. You all don't have like an official decision maker. Of course, the father makes a decision, mother makes a decision sometimes. That's different. But if you take like social classes, ethnic groups, right? Now you take okay teenagers. Teenagers are a social class. It's a political institute in this world. It's teenagers, so which all of you guys belong to, right? You guys belong to this what do you call this group called teenagers. We have different ethnic groups, different religions, right? Religions, of course, at least something. You have like a church. Like if you are Buddhist, you have the Kandy Dalada Maliga. If you are Catholic, you have the Vatican City place. Like if you are a Muslim, you have the Macau. That of course that's something. But you take the races. Do the Sinhalese have headquarters? Do the Sinhalese have like one top leader of the Sinhalese race? Do the Muslims have like one Muslim leader? Don't mix that up with the Islamic religion leaders. Like the Muslims don't have one leader, right? The Christians, of course, that's a religion. Now, of course, you take like a race, like the white people. Do the white people have like Caucasians? Do they have like headquarters, or do they have like a certain leader? Do they have rules that only apply to that ethnicity? No. So, but these are social classes and these are ethnic groups, and we encounter them quite often. So those are also social political institutes which we are constantly encountering, but they are not tangible, they are not visible, but they exist in the society. So these are the two types of political institutions we have in the society: formal and informal. Okay, now we are going to study 4 of these formal institutions in our syllabus. These are the 4: state and government, political parties, pressure groups, and civil society. Okay. Now, again, this is a big chunk. This is pretty much the most important part of the lesson. Okay, of the unit. And because this is a quick revision, I'll be going a little fast. Okay. And again, you can come to my junior class. Just let me know. Just send me a DM if you want to take part in this class. Or else, there's a webinar I did on these political parties, pressure groups, and civil society, which is available on my YouTube channel. Which if you want, I can send you the link. Or if you go to my YouTube channel, that's there with 2020 webinars series. Okay. So here I'll be going a little fast. Right. First, let's look at the basic institute in the society, in the political system, the state and the government. So, if you guys took part in my basics class, where I normally do a basics class before starting off the official classes with you all, so I taught the difference between state and government. So if you missed that, I'll just briefly explain once more. State is basically like the key institute, the core institute in the political context of today. Now, the third unit is entirely about that state, right? The third unit is only about state. So, basically, here you have the state is like the core element, the foundation of the political system we have today, right? A state is basically an organized community or a politically organized human community. People get together and they form a state. Okay. So there are 4 elements for each state. Okay. The ones who did the third unit with me must be knowing this. Others, of course, if you learned it from somewhere else, must be knowing it. It's pretty basic. What are the 4 elements? Territory, nationhood, government, and sovereignty. For anyone who didn't know, I'll just mention it once more. You all can jot that down. The territory, nationhood, sovereignty, and government. Okay. Do not worry. The next revision class would be on unit 3. Okay, so I'll be discussing that anyway. So you have state and government. Basically, state is the combination of those 4. You need to have a territory, first of all. If you claim a state, right? If you play nowadays, a state is a country. Sri Lanka is one state, India is one state, USA is one state. In the beginning, we saw during the Greek era, each city was a state. Athens was a state, Sparta was a state, Troy was a state, and so on and so forth, right? So the format changed from time to time, and in modern day context, each country is a state, and you have then you have nationhood. So what is the meaning of nationhood? In the old syllabus, uh, this used to be population, right? But just having a population is not enough. You need to have a population who thinks as your state, right? Who thinks as we are members of a certain state. Then, of course, you have sovereignty, which is the supreme power the state has, and then you need to have a government. So you can see that state and government are like basically like state is like the conceptual development that we have. That basically when we put territory, nationhood, government and sovereignty together, and government is just one of those elements that is required to confirm your statehood. When you put those four things together only, you get the state. Okay, right? So if you guys were there, that I used a very basic, relatable example, something that is we are very familiar with, right? So if you take a religion as an example, it's very easy to understand what is the connection between state and government. Okay, so when you say state and government, the state is a concept. That's number one. It's a conceptual development. Okay, let me stop screen share. Right, state is basically a conceptual development. It's something we've created. The state is here. It's something we've created in our minds, right? Now, if you take a look at the world map, okay, if you take a look at the world map, of course, Sri Lanka, you can see that as a country, right? Sri Lanka, you can picture it as a country because we are an island, okay? So understand, we have borders, natural borders. But if you look at Africa, right? Africa is like just one huge chunk of land, okay? But it has, Africa has the most number of countries in a continent has. Africa has some 54, 55 odd countries. Okay. But it is one giant landmass. Okay. How do they have that many countries? Because the borders are hypothetical. They are conceptual. That you consider from this point onward is my territory, from this point above beyond that point is your territory. Like that. Okay. So these states are conceptual, things that we've created in our minds. Okay. And governments are practical. Governments are like real life people who's active doing work. Okay. But the thing is this, the state has sovereignty power, which is so supreme. The government does not have that much of power. Government only has a power that is delegated to them by the state. Okay. And the state, although state is so powerful, state is the most powerful organization according to political science, but it can't fulfill any of the tasks because it's merely a concept. It can't do its own task on its own. It has a lot of tasks, but it can't do any of those tasks. So you are going to need a practical instrument, practical hand to carry out those tasks, which is where the government comes in, right? So if this sounds a little confusing to you, the best way to go is referring to the relatable example. Okay. Now, I personally don't know how many of you all are religious, how many of you all find religion as like a very sensitive topic, right? So just a disclaimer, I'm not referring to this as an insult. At least when I'm thinking reasonably, I don't see this as an insult, which is why I'm using this example. But if religion is something like sensitive to you, it might sound a little sensitive. Okay, so just a disclaimer. I mean no disrespect. This is just an example for you to understand this better. Right? So if you take your example, if you take your religion as the example, right? Think of a religion, like either think of Buddhism or Christianity or Catholicism or Islam, right? I think those are the pretty much all the religions that people in this class represent at the time. Not sure whether we have any, I don't think we have any Hindus here, right? Not sure, but I think pretty much those were the religions, okay? So when you think, let's take one religion for example, okay, let's pick Catholicism or let's pick Christianity for an example, right? Let's pick Christianity for an example. Christianity is a religion, okay? It is a religion and it has so much power. right? Just like Islam, just like Buddhism, just like Catholicism, Christianity also has so much power because it is a widely followed religion in the world. Just like, all four are the same. I'm just picking one to explain, right? So all four religions are the same. Like they have so much followers and they have so much power, global power, and they have so many tasks, right? So each religion is supposed to serve its followers, right? Now, speaking from a Buddhist perspective, I was born a Buddhist, like I'm more of an atheist with my beliefs, but I'm more of a Buddhist, right? Like was born a Buddhist. So according to Buddhism, as how I've learned Buddhism, Buddhism has a duty to help each and everyone to achieve nirvana, right? So nirvana is like the final goal of a Buddhist. So it is stopping your rebirth. That's what we believe. As Buddhists, we believe that when you die, you are born again. It's like a circle that you are born and you have to suffer in lives and then you die and you're born again. So it's a circle. So your final purpose is stopping your birth, that circle, breaking that circle, and basically just signing off, right, from this circle. So Buddhism has a duty to help the Buddhists to achieve that goal. Okay, so we say like when we have a Lord Buddha, like it says that we are supposed to get 28 Lord Buddhas. We've had 27 thus far, and there's one yet to come. And by the time that Lord Buddha comes, when we meet him, that he's going to help us to stop this circle of being born and all that, and then the final motive is achieved. So I think just like that, just forgive me if my religion, this is what I've learned, okay? It might be different. I haven't learned as much as you all because you all might have a religious background. So I believe that the Christians and the Catholics have the goal of meeting God in the end, like connecting to Jesus Christ, right? And I think for Islam followers, is that the same with you? Like, are you all supposed to go where, meet God Allah, is it? You all are supposed to like, Rashid, is that the case? What is like the last purpose following Islam?
Yeah, sir.
That's kind of the thing, right? You need to meet God. So I've heard like, Christianity, Catholicism, Islam, and Judaism all are coming from the same origin. So all of them have the same format, right? So it's like
Yes, sir.
God, yeah, right? So all these powerful religions have that motive, have that task of helping their followers to achieve that ultimate goal each religion has. Okay. But here's the thing, it is conceptual, right? Can any of you all tell me what color is Christianity? Can any of you tell me the shape of Catholicism? Can any of you all point out at Islam in a world map? Right? Can any of you all tell me where Buddhism is? It's conceptual, right? So when you say, when you tell the name of a religion, it refers to the totality, the followers and all the religious teachings and the religious places, right? Those archaeological values, the culture associated with it. When you say Buddhism, it refers to all the monks, all the Buddhist followers, all the Buddhist literature, all the Buddhist history, legacy, and all those archaeological places, temples, everything, right? When you put all of them together, you get Buddhism, right? When you take the church and the Christian followers and the Bible and the Jerusalem and all the literature and the legacy, all of them together, you call it Christianity. So it's conceptual. It is a conceptual word that we use to refer to the totality. So it is a conceptual development. Whether you say Islam or Christianity or Catholicism or Buddhism, there is a conceptual development. It is not like a physical force. It is not a physically existing thing that is made out of matter. Okay. So still, despite that not being like a real life physically built force or a physical building or a solid object, right? It still has so much power, right? So, and it has tasks. Christianity is a conceptual development, okay, which exists in the concepts that is developed by the Christians, It is a conceptual name you use to the totality of everything that includes in Christianity, right? But Christianity has like a lot of duties, lot of important duties. So it's supposed to take care of the Christians in the world. It's supposed to help Christians to find God. It's supposed to protect Christian legacy. It's supposed to make sure that the religion is properly taught to the newer generations. All those duties are there. But in order to fulfill those duties, is Christianity a real force? Right? It is not, because it's conceptual, which is why Christianity is going to need a practical hand, a practical instrument to carry out that duties. That's when the church comes in, right? Church is that practical instrument Christianity has to carry out those duties. Okay, Christianity has a duty to take care of the Christians. Church does it for Christianity. Christianity has a duty to help Christians find God, to teach the religion to the younger generations, to protect the Christian legacy, which is done by the church. Understand? Same goes to other religions, right? The mosque does it for Islam. Okay. The temple does it for Buddhism. That is the practical instrument that carries out that duty. And it is the same that applies to politics as well. Just like a religion is so powerful, the state is also so powerful. But just like the religion is not a physically existing force or a solid object, state is also not a physically solid object that exists, just like religion. Okay, and just like the religion requires a practical instrument as a church or a mosque or one of that instruments to carry out those important duties they have, right? State also require a practical instrument to carry out those duties, which is the government. Okay, right? And of course, Christianity is so powerful, almighty powerful, right? Christianity, and I think you all refer to him as you all refer to God as Almighty God, right? They have heard that, right? So Almighty God, and Christianity is almighty powerful. To Islam followers, Islam is almighty powerful. To Buddhists, Buddhism is almighty powerful. There's religion is what we follow, and that's the most powerful spiritual element in our lives. Okay, so it is almighty powerful, yes, but it doesn't exist as a physical force or a solid object. Okay, and the tasks of that religion are carried out by a practical instrument, either a mosque or a church or a temple. Now, does that instrument have all that power? Christianity is almighty powerful. Does the church almighty powerful? No, church has a limited power given by Christianity. Does the mosque have unlimited power? No, right? It has a power given by Islam. Temple doesn't have unlimited power. Temple has a limited power given by Buddhism, right? But they are the real instrument. They are the real thing. They are the real thing that carries out all the duties of that almighty religion. In every religion, that's how it works. And that's how it works in politics as well. State is almighty, powerful. It has all the duties. Yes. But who carries out those? The practical instrument of government. But government doesn't have the almighty powers. Government only has a limited power given to them. Okay. Right? So, Sri Lanka state is like Christianity. The church is like the Sri Lankan government, right? And whoever's in charge of the church, not sure, you all use the word father or priest or reverend. So whoever's in charge of the church, and he is similar to Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who's in charge of the government in Sri Lanka. Okay. Is that part clear? Any doubt? No doubt, I believe. Okay. Right. So there is a note for the state and government. We'll quickly read this and then we'll move on to the difference between state and government. We'll quickly discuss that. Okay. Right. Let's get someone to read this. Shane sir, can you read the state and government for us, please?
The state and government. Every political society is based on the core of the state and the government. Most of the other political institutions derive their existence, authority, and legitimacy from the state and government. Example, the parliament, cabinet, the judiciary, local government authorities, the police, the armed forces, prisoners, government departments, government corporations, schools, and universities. It is a common misconception in politics to identify state and government as the same entity, although these two are connected as concepts. The distinction between the state and government is practically pronounced in modern democratic society. In modern democracy, the state is a central institution of political power in which political sovereignty of the community is institutionalized. It has a relatively longer existence than the government. The government is the main institutional agency of the state. In other words, the government is the practical hand of the state. According to the democratic principles, the government is the political institution elected by the people and authorized by the people to carry out functions of the state. Unlike the state, the government has a limited term of office. In pre-democratic era, during monarchies, the distinction between state and the government were not visible. People did not have the right to elect the government, hence the government did not seek approval of people for their authority. Therefore, the state and the government were both located at the monarchy.
Right. Now I've left some space here for you to jot down the difference between state and government as a paragraph. One more thing here, you can see in the pre-democratic era, when you had a king and all, right? When you have a king and all, of course, this difference was not clear. When you have a king, he doesn't differ by saying, you know, I am just the king, I have a limited power, state has all the powers. No, he was like, no, I am the state. King Louis XIV literally said, right? King Louis XIV literally said, I am the state. It's a direct quote from him, I am the state, right? So in those, the state is almighty, king is also almighty. It's only in democratic formats that we started realizing, no, it is not actually the same thing. Government doesn't have all the powers and state is just conceptual, right? So we started understanding this in the modern format of democracies, okay? Right, then there's this table that explains, of course, you can see state is not practical, it's not tangible, it's merely a concept, okay? Compared to government, it is practical, it is tangible, and it is not merely a concept, it exists in real life, right? State has a longer history, state has existed since, you know, tribal state, in Greek city-states and all. Well, the separate kind of a government sort of came into existence with national state coming into play. It was quite recent, like 300, 400 years ago. State, of course, membership is not optional, right? We are all members of Sri Lanka, so the state of Sri Lanka, and that was not optional. The moment we were born, like, you know, when our parents were, like, you know, carrying us after we were being born, like some nurse would come and would have came and given a form to our fathers or our mothers and asking them to fill that for your birth certificate. And what does that birth certificate mean? That your parents enrolled you as a citizen of Sri Lankan state. It's not optional, right? And you can't quit that. You can't be like, okay, I'm sort of like, I'm bored being a member of Sri Lanka, you know, I'm just going to terminate my membership and just be a member of nowhere. No, you can't do that. You have to be a member of some state. You can cancel Sri Lankan state's membership if you are taking the membership of another country. If you want to become an Australian citizen, then yeah, you can cancel it, but then you need to get the citizenship of another, right? And you can't get the citizenship of two countries. Some people think that you can get dual citizenship, that, you know, there's a small myth in that. You only get PR in one country, but there's a whole different thing. If you want further clarifications, send me a text on WhatsApp, I'll explain how that works. Dual citizenship does not work. You can be a citizen in one country only, right? If you are, then some people say you have dual citizenship in Australia and Sri Lanka. No, they have PR in Australia that they can visit anytime with visa. Anyways, like, unless you are like someone like Albert Einstein, Tom Hanks, or like Mother Teresa, right? Those people are given dual citizenship. Like, you know, some countries award them citizenship where you can actually take it without canceling the one you already have. Not everyone can do that. So in general, membership is not optional, right? You have to be a member of some country. It is given to you whether you like it or not by your parents. If you are changing your membership, you have to take the membership of another state, right? And you can't be member of more than one state at once. So that's how the state membership works. Government membership, of course, being a member of the government, that's like being a minister or being the prime minister, that's obviously optional. You have to run for president and run for minister, or run for parliament and, become a minister, that's optional. And, you can be a member and then you can quit, you can resign. So that's completely optional. Then state has sovereignty power, we saw it because it's almighty, right? Government does not have all that power. Government only has like a delegated, limited amount of power, right? Then it is illegal to stand against the state, of course, right? And it is illegal, it is, it is not illegal to stand against the, yeah, there's a small printing mistake here. It is not illegal to stand against the government, not state government. It is not illegal to stand against the government, right? So, now I normally use this example. I normally explain this quite a lot if I have time, right? When Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president of this country, he had two enemies, right? From 2005 to 2000, let's say his first reign, 2005 to 2009. He had two enemies. One was Ranil Wickremesinghe. Other one was Prabhakara, Velupille Prabhakara, right? So one of them got killed, other one didn't, because one of them was doing something wrong, other one wasn't doing something wrong. And what's the difference? Prabhakaran stood against the state of Sri Lanka. He wanted to break a piece of the territory of Sri Lanka. That means he's affecting the territory of Sri Lanka, nationhood of Sri Lanka, and the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. Right? Which means he wanted to break a piece of the state of Sri Lanka and claim it as a separate state, right? So that was standing against a sovereign state, right? So which was considered wrong because he's not allowed to do that. On the other hand, Ranil Wickremesinghe was constantly attacking Mahinda Rajapaksa, but he was attacking the government. He was attacking Mahinda's government. So although they were enemies, he wasn't doing anything wrong. Technically speaking, Ranil was doing his job. He was the opposition leader and his job is to attack the government. Okay. So I normally say this, you can actually go stand in front of president's secretariat office holding one of, president's photos and, just, burn it and say, you are ruining the country and all that. You're allowed to do that. Not a problem. Right. I don't know whether later a white van would come and you would disappear. That is unofficial, okay? According to the political science syllabus and according to like the proper law, you are not doing anything wrong. You are standing up against the government. You are like burning down a picture of Gotabaya and you are saying, I don't like your government. You are destroying the country. But if you go in front of the president's place and you set fire a national flag, that means you are attacking the state of Sri Lanka. Then you are going to be arrested on treason, okay? So it is illegal to stand against the state. You can't stand against Sri Lanka, but you can stand against the Sri Lankan government. Okay, not a problem. It's perfectly legal. So much so, some people do that as their profession. People in the parliament who are sitting in the opposition party, Sajith and his people, that's their job to attack the government, right? Okay, then states are similar in format. Those four I said, like the territory, nationhood, sovereignty, and government. Those four are the elements of a state wherever you go, right? The features may differ like in sizes and all, like, you take the population in Sri Lanka is 23 million, New Zealand is 6 million, China is 1,500 million. But after all, it's a population and a nationhood, right? Territory also, you can have like somewhere like Andorra, which is like the size of like one city, or Vatican City, right? The size of like can go from this end to that end in 30 minutes. And you have countries like Canada, Russia, Brazil, huge countries of like size of like entire size of Europe. But still, it's a territory, right? So the thing is, they are similar. They are similar in format. Format is the same wherever you go. Government takes different formats. Some countries have like democratic governments. Some countries have socialist governments. Some have like fascist. Some have military governments and all that. Okay. And even the format we just discussed in the theory class, some countries have cabinet government, some countries have presidential government, some countries have mixed governments like Sri Lanka. Okay. So it can take different formats. Then the state is a computer figure. Of course, when you put those four elements together, state becomes a computer figure. And but other than that, you can see government is only one element that is necessary for that completion. Okay, and the last one, state only exists within the territories, right? Like when you pass Jaffna and when you go take like 16 kilometers, you go in the sea 16 kilometers after passing the coast of Jaffna. Then from that point onwards, it's India, right? From that point onwards, you don't have Sri Lanka in effect. State only exists, state power exists within the territory only, but the government can actually fly anywhere. Like there are examples of Sri Lanka having those flood issues and stuff, and who the Maithripala Sirisena making his decisions from Singapore. He was making his decisions from Singapore. And there are historical evidence when Hitler was invading Norway, the Norwegian government was making decisions from England. Saddam Hussein, when he invaded Kuwait government fled to Saudi Arabia and make decisions from there. So the government can practically exist, like as long as they can communicate with their people, they can exist wherever in the world or even the universe, from moon, from the Mars, as long as they can communicate, not a problem. Okay, so they are not controlled by borders. Is that part clear? Then we are moving on to the most important part, political parties. Any questions, guys? Any doubts? Okay, seems none. So we can move on to political parties. Right. Can you guys hear me? Am I audible, guys? I'm seem to be having like a connection issue, small connection issue. Hello?
Yes, sir.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks. Okay, now we are moving to political parties. Political parties are quite important because we consider that to be the blood of the body of democracy. Okay, so we normally consider political parties as like the cornerstone of the political systems we have at the moment. What do we know? What are we familiar with when you say political parties? What are we normally familiar with? Like when you say politics, what are we familiar with? We are familiar with like political parties contesting with one another in elections, winning elections, losing elections. This is what we know as politics, right? That's a modern politics we have. And political parties do an important duty getting that job done. Okay. So as you can see that political parties are an extremely important entity. Okay. And we need to be familiar with the definition of a political party, right? What is the definition of a political party? Let's take a look at the definition of a political party. Right? In general, political parties can be defined as a group of people who are gathered together in order to pursue political power. Right? So it's a group of people. So there are so many groups of people, right? We have so many groups of people, like people get gathered for different reasons. Why do people gather together? Why do people gather together for different purposes? They have different purposes. Some people are gathered together to pursue political power. That's what they want. Right? They want to pursue political power, and those people, those groups are known as political parties. That's a unique thing. Okay, so their basic, fundamental, like their basic purpose is gaining more political power. They are gathered together to gain political power. And what is the most common way of gaining political power? What is the most common way? Elections, contesting elections, right? Then normally, like you have heard that these people scolding politicians. Let's say a politician comes to a funeral and speaks there. Politician comes and give you like charity stuff, like gives away stuff when people are like in hunger and there's a natural disaster or something like that. And people scold them saying, what, these people, he just wants our votes. He's just doing all of this because he's looking at the votes. He just wants power. He doesn't care about us. Well, yeah, I mean, like that's what they do. Okay, I'm not saying that that's justified. That's very cunning still, but that's a reality. That's what they do. According to the political science, they pursue political power. So what they try to do is to assure the political power they have. Whatever they do is connected to trying to assure the political power they have. That's what political parties do, right? And since modern context, political power goes with elections, right? Because it goes with elections. Everything political scientists do, sorry, everything politicians do, right? Political party members do, comes down to securing more power in an election. That's their purpose. They just do whatever to get more votes as much as they can. Right? It comes down to that. It comes down to their final purpose, which is pursuing political power. Okay. And now we need to sort of take a look at, now you all must be having this textbook, right? You all can read it. And if you all want, you all can refer to my, either refer to my Sunday junior class or my webinar on YouTube, where I'm like, reading all this and explaining the historical development. But here, since we don't have much time, I'm directly moving to the main features, okay? Yeah, I'm directly moving on to the main features part, okay? Right. So what are the main features? Number one, obviously, the obvious one, most obvious one, pursuing political power. That's the whole reason they are together, okay? They are together to pursue political power and to gain more power as much as they can. That's they are in the definition. Obviously, that's going to be their first task, right? First feature, because that is they are in their definition. They are a group that is gathered together to pursue political power, and then pursuing political power has to be their first task, right? By the way, I've put these features and tasks because in the syllabus this is given in like sometimes they say main task of political party, sometimes they say main feature of political party, but it refers to the same thing, right? So I put both. Then organizing the public opinion. What does this mean? The public has an opinion at the moment. What is the public opinion about the government? Is it a positive one or a negative one? These days, people have a very negative opinion about the government, right? And I remember even when we had the last government, Maithripala Ranil's national government, people also had a very bad, very negative opinion about that government, right? And there were times that people had very positive opinions also. When Gotabaya came, initially they had a very positive opinion, and when Ranil and Maithripala came also, they had a very positive opinion. Okay, so this public opinion is all over the place. That's a problem, right? This public opinion is all over the place now, because people don't really gather in one place to scold the government, right? People don't gather in one place to scold the government. They just don't like the government. That's all. Now, I personally, I have a very negative opinion about this government at the moment. But I have my day-to-day life, right? I have to, do my classes and do my court cases and write my books and attend my debating practices and attend my family matters and my personal life. And I have my stuff going in my life. I don't have a particular time to dedicate to sort of like put the hate, like not a hate, like the negativity I have towards the government into effect. Okay. Which is why you are going to need political parties, because all the citizens are like me. They have an opinion which they are not necessarily putting into effect. Okay. So because of that, the only option you have is the political parties have to come together and organize their public opinion, right? Now, one thing I see in Sri Lankan politics is that I personally think Rajapakshas are very skillful politicians comparing to UNP, right? UNP has like two entities, one Ranil, one Sajith, and I honestly can't tell which is worse in terms of like worse in this is not character-wise, right? Worse in the sense like politics-wise, like the politics, the practical politics part, right? How to play politics. I personally say Sajith is a little better, again, like in terms of politics. I'm not saying like whether Sajith is more qualified as a leader, right? Not that. I'm talking about playing the game of politics, right? Because Ranil Wickremesinghe, people say that he would have been a good politician in the US or somewhere, or Switzerland or somewhere. Like, he doesn't know how to he doesn't understand how people think. That's a part of the playing the game of politics. And when Ranil and Maitripal and that government was going, and when the people were getting a little bitter about the government little by little, Rajapakshas managed to organize that public opinion to one place and chase that government away. When that government was losing its popularity, the opposition party, Rajapaksa, they formed this port to a new party and they actually organize the public opinion really well. That's an ideal example of how to organize the public opinion. They gathered the public opinion and they chased the government away quite successfully. Right? Comparing to that, at the moment, what is happening is Sajid Premadas and Samajana Balweke, they are failing to channel and organize that negativity people have towards this government, which is why my personal opinion, I think that Rajapakshas are better political players, right? Miles ahead, okay, which is evident in elections in Sri Lanka. Anyways, the point is, political parties have a duty to organize the public opinion because either people are positive about something, people are negative about something. Political parties have to put that together because people don't come together on their own. People have their stuff happening, right? So putting the public opinion together and making it effective is a duty the political parties have. Then providing political education. In the first lesson, we saw that people learn politics formally and informally. So when it comes to informal political education, political parties do a vast duty because they are the ones who speak in elections, they are the ones who speak in news channels, and people learn quite a lot of politics informally and by using political parties as a source. Okay, then making policies. Making policies is something like this. A policy is basically what you would do. What you would do when people ask like, what is the policy of the government regarding COVID? People ask that. That means like government have to tell what they are planning to do regarding policies. Okay, that's what you mean like making policies. So that's what policies mean. So if you are a political party, that means you are seeking power, right? You are seeking governmental power. Every political party that runs in an election is technically telling the people, give us a chance to run the government. That's what every political party is practically saying. You are contesting an election, that means allow me to run the government. So if you get to run the government, people will be like, what would you be doing? Hypothetically, given that you have the government, what should you be doing? And that's where the policy is coming. Then you say, this is our policy about education. These are policy about fishery. These are policy about agriculture. These are policy about finance. These are policy about defense. This is what we would do regarding this area if we have the power. So that's what you call making policy. So if you want to get more votes from people, you better listen to people and check what they want and make policies accordingly. So when people would look at it, they'll be like, okay, these guys seem to be having good policies. That means if these guys have the government, they'll do a good job. Okay, understand? So then providing membership and taking leaders. So basically in political parties, we normally say can be different at certain exceptional situations, but more members you have, more members the better. That's a normal policy. Like if you have more people running the political party, then you have more layers, you can reach more people, and more people the better. And you need to provide membership, and you need to train leaders. In addition to the leader you already have, you need to train upcoming leaders, right? So not only for the political party, but for the country as well. A political party developing new leaders means that there is a potential leader for the country as well. So we consider political party, I can highlight this, consider political party as a training academy for future leaders. Like you learn how to make policies, how to run a country, and so on and so forth.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, does like a retired politician, is he still a member of the political party?
If he is retired, that depends, Prashit, whether he's retired from the party or whether he's retired from the parliament.
Like example, if you take Chandrika, is she retired from the party as well?
She is retired from the party. Yeah, she's not a there. I think she came back when Maitripal was in charge of the party. She came back, I think. But other than that, barring that, yes, if you like sort of like, okay, it's like this again, going back to the school and prefectship example. Now, you can retire from your prefectship, but you're still a member of the student, member in the school, right? Unless that you have retired from your studentship also by, resigning from school. then you are retired completely. So when you say retired, it depends whether he's retired from the political party itself or from whatever the institute he was a member of, right? You can retire now. You can see Ranil. Ranil is practically retired from the parliament, right? No, he's not. Like in June, he's coming back. Like UNP had one seat, so they've announced that Ranil is coming back. Okay, so we need to take someone else as the example. Let's say Ravi Karunanika or pretty much anyone in the UNP, they didn't get the seat, so they are not in the parliament anymore. So they are technically retired from the parliament, but he's still a member of the party. So if you take someone like Mangala Samaravira, right? Mangala Samaravira is retired from politics as well. He's retired from the parliament. He's retired from the party as well. And he's doing TikTok videos and he's appearing in those Vasti YouTube videos and all that, right? Good for him. Okay. So any other doubts regarding the features of political parties? Right? Pursuing political power, organizing public opinion, providing informal political education, making policies, and providing membership and training leaders. Then we need to move on to the classification of political parties. Because we are going fast, you guys will need to, take a big bite. Big bite maybe is little too much for you to chew and swallow, but can't help because it's a quick revision. I had to go fast. Okay. So there are two classifications we are going to learn in this class. Okay, in this unit. Number one is, this is something, please don't confuse here, right? Please don't get confused here. I don't know. I'll beg you, please be watchful. This is something that really, piss me off when people sort of like get these two mixed up, because it's very basic. As long as you pay attention, you don't get this mixed up. This is classification of political parties. Okay. Classification of political parties. Here, what we are doing is classification of political parties. The second part is classification of party systems. Okay. Political parties classification is one. Political party system classification is another, right? So right now what we are going to do is political party classification. Later we are doing political party system classification. Please do not mix that up, right? So in a paper, if I give a question, political party classification, you need to write this: cadre-based, mass, representative, integrative, constitutional, revolutionary, and left-wing, right-wing. Okay. When I ask for party classification, don't write one party system, two party system, three multi-party system. For real. Okay. That's party system categorization. Okay. Right. So political party classification. How do you classify political parties? There are various ways to categorize. First, you can divide them as cadre-based and non-cadre, or as mass parties. Let's take one by one. What is cadre-based and mass parties? What is the difference between cadre and mass? Okay. I'll ask a question from one of you all, right? Okay. Shamil, are you here? Shamil, are you here? Are you asleep? Seems to be in sleep. Rifki, what about you?
Yes.
All right, okay. Okay, I'll ask you a question. Will you be able to run for parliament now? You are 18 next year, right? Or are you 18 already?
I'm 18, sir.
Okay, right. So if you provided that in a couple of years a parliament election come, do you think that you can run for a seat in Colombo from either Gotabaya, Sri Lanka, Podujana Peramuna, or Sajith Samagi Jana Balawege?
No, sir.
Mainly because why?
Those are big parties and require money.
Because of this. Yeah, you need big money, right? If you want to run a campaign in Colombo, at least you are going to need 30 million rupees. right? 30 million, 3 cores. At least 30 million. That's like a budget campaign, right? 30 million is like a campaign on a budget. If you are doing a campaign in Colombo, right, to posters and all these like office or like to those quarters places and to pay people, right? So all those things you need at least 30 million. So that is some not something that we can afford, right? But you can run from like a smaller party for that matter, right? A smaller party, because running from the smaller parties doesn't require that much of money, right? And when you take the two big parties in Sri Lanka Podujana Party and like Samagijana Balawegi, Sajid's party and Gotabe's party, have any of y'all met? Have any of y'all met any of these members in the parliament, like any of Sajid's members in the parliament or Gotabe's members in the parliament? Have you all met any of them at a food city picking vegetables? Right? Have you all like ever come across? Have you all ever been in the queue in the bank with one of Sajid Premada's closest people? Have you all ever been stuck in the traffic where you are in this car and then right in the other car right next to you is like one of Gotabe's ministers driving with his wife and children? No, because they don't come to Food City. They don't come to the bank. They don't drive like that in the traffic, right? They have like servants, they have vehicles, they have drivers. Their money directly goes to the bank and they have VIP sections. And like, when they're going, like they close the road, then all those guys go and then only we get to go, right? So those are big shots, big money. So to run for an election from one of these parties, you are going to need a lot of money. And you can see that people, the members in these parties are rich people in the first place. So these are the cadre parties, parties that are supported and ran by rich people, upper class, higher class people, high profile people in the society. Mass parties mean the parties that are ran by people like us, middle class people, right? Now there is a political party called the New Left Front, Nava Vamanshika Peramuna. The leader is Mr. Vikramababa Karunaratne. Okay, and my uncle met him in the bus one day. Okay, have you all ever met Sajid Premadass in a bus? Have you all ever met Gotabaya Rajapaksa in a bus? No, some of the politicians go in the bus just like a show, like they go in the bus to show that they are with the general people and they take a photo and put it on their face. That's barring that. That's not really right. There's this. There was this meme I saw, like there was this politician. So barring that, when you actually think about it, these people are like really rich, and these parties are consisted of rich people like that. Okay, so mass parties are different. Mass parties are like normal people. So those parties are supported by like the working class people, the labor unions, intellectuals, and all those people. Okay, so normally back in the day we actually could have used JVP as an example for mass parties, right? But I personally don't use that example anymore because they are sort of transforming into a cadre party themselves. They are actually pasting posters and sort of like earning money from the party, working with NGOs and all that. So I don't really use that example. But back in the day, if you go like 10-15 years back, then yes, then you can take UNP and SLFP as like typical cadre parties which are run by like rich people, upper class, high profile people, aristocratic people coming from like those big family trees, right? And JVP was like a mass party where you would actually meet like one of those JVP people in the market, right? Not so much anymore. Okay. But the ideal example is in Britain. Britain, of course, you have the Conservative Party, which is a cadre party, and the other party is the Labour Party. That's a mass party. But then you have USA, where they are both big parties, Democratic and Republican, both parties are cadre parties. So that's the difference between cadre and mass parties. Okay. Right. So let's read cadre-based mass parties to find out. Ishma, can you read?
Yes. Cadre-based parties and mass parties, non-cadre. A cadre-based party is basically a political party funded and run by upper class of the society. This includes businessmen, aristocrats, and rich people in general. These cadre-based parties are only active during election seasons, and their representation is mostly limited to rich politicians. Example, Democratic and Republican parties in the US, Conservative Party in the UK. Non-cadre parties are basically political parties funded and run by the middle class and lower class of society. This includes union leaders, professional activists, laborers, middle class, and lower class in general. These non-cadre parties are active even during non-election seasons, and their representation mostly consists of middle class and lower class people. Example, Labour Party in the UK, Libertarian Party in the US.
Okay, thank you. So that's the first classification of political parties. Then we have another one, representative and integrative. Now, would you remember we talked about public opinion, that a political party can actually change the public opinion, shift the public opinion, organize the public opinion, right? So when it comes to public opinion, there are two ways to approach that. One is representing the public opinion as it is. Second, you can actually try to change the public opinion from what it is. For example, let's say if we are a political party and we want to contest in Sri Lanka, and let's say Sri Lanka has a very racist society, right? So either we can be that, we'll be like, okay, people are racist. That's what people are expecting. So we'll be racist. And we represent the racist agendas, nationalist agendas and all that. That way we will get votes. That's representative parties. Or we can be integrative. They'll be like, okay, people are racist. Let's try to change how they think. Okay, let's try to change how they think. And that's called integrative party. This can happen the other way around also. Representative parties doesn't mean always you represent something negative. It could be other way around also. It could actually be this. It could be like maybe the people can be like non-racist. We make a political party and people are like very liberal, non-racist. So we'll be like, okay, let's represent as how this is, right? As how this is. People are non-racist, so let's not be racist. Okay. Or else we can try being integrative. So people are very cool with other races. Let's try to change them. Let's try to change them into racist people. So it happens both ways. Okay. Point is whether if you are like representing what people already believe, you are a representative party, you try to change what they think, that's an integrative party. Okay. Right. Next part. Okay. Mufasa bad jokes. Is that you, Safwa? I see a student called Mufasa bad jokes.
Safwa didn't join today.
Okay. Who is Mufasa then?
Yumna, sir.
Ah, right. Okay. Can you read?
Oh, yeah. Representative and integrative parties. Representative parties represent the public opinion as it is, while integrative parties attempt to shape and mobilize public opinions. Therefore, representative parties seem to have a conservative approach, while integrative parties have a liberal approach. Example, the Republican Party in the US sticks to conservative public opinions and defines their stance against LGBT rights, abortion, immigration, anti-gun laws, while Democrats are attempting to shape the public opinion on above matters.
Right, thank you. Are you not well? Are you like having like a sore throat or something?
No.
Ah, okay, sorry. Anyways, yeah, so thank you for reading that. Anyways, I just wanted to explain that this is what I explained, right? You know, you see that US sticks to, like in US, you have the Republican Party, and they stick to their stance against LGBT rights because they go with conservative public opinion, what Americans conservatively believe. So they are against LGBT rights, they are against abortions, they are against immigration, they are for gun laws, right? And the Democrats are sort of trying to change this. They are trying to bring LGBT rights up. They are trying to bring abortion up, allow abortion. They are trying to allow more immigration. They are trying to ban gun laws, right? So that's a classic example of the Republicans sticking to the conservative opinions and the Democrats trying to change that. What is constitutional and revolutionary parties? What is that difference? Constitutional means that, what is the main purpose of a political party? What's number one of a political party? Number one thing, pursuing political power, right? So there are two ways you can do this. Either you can do it the democratic way, or you can do it the non-democratic way, right? So one way of doing this is like contesting elections, sticking to the methods that are given in the constitution, right? Or sometimes they can sort of like go like a little one step forward and they can try something not very democratic. And those are called revolutionary parties. Okay. So for example, UNP, SLFP, there are two political parties in Sri Lanka. They have attempted to gain governmental power only through elections, only according to the way that the constitution provides. But while doing that, you of course commit all sorts of like frauds, right? You kill people and you put illegal ballots and all that. Yeah, that's that's practicality, right? But in reality, in legality, they haven't done anything. Like they haven't taken any illegal option to take powers, right? They've only taken the option of taking constitutional elections, right? They contest elections in order to win the election and form the government, and that's pretty much it. They don't try anything beyond that. But compared to the JVP, they attempted to gain power in Sri Lanka through two armed revolutions. 1971, they tried once, didn't work. 88, 89, they tried for the second time. This time it was even more bloodier, even more very effective and very violent. And which is why Sri Lanka has very much dark memories from during those times. And of course, in 1994, they turned into a constitutional party, and which means they were a revolutionary party at one point, and then they turned into a constitutional party later on. Okay. Then, of course, this is fourth one, left wing, right wing. This is basically which economic theory you follow, right? We saw in political ideology, we saw that there's liberalism and there's socialism, right? Liberalism and socialism. So if you are following liberalism, you're a right-wing party, right? Liberal capitalism. If you are following socialism, you are a left-wing party. Okay. Then there are other subcategories in that, whether you are center left or you are far left, is are you really, really left? Are you really, really socialist? Or are you mildly socialist? Those things are there. So some people say that, some parties are moderate, not neither left, not neither right, but so other political scientists say no, you are either left or either right. It depends on up to what extent you are right now. I personally, I am a right-wing person, but I'm very much of a center right-wing person because I have some leftist ideas as well, not like an extreme capitalist or an extreme liberal. But after all, I'm a right-wing person. Okay. Right. Then the last, these two. Ramon, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please read these 3 and 4 for us.
Constitutional parties and revolutionary parties. A constitutional party is a political party that sticks to the constitutional means within a democratic format to gain political power. A revolution party can go beyond constitutional and democratic methods in order to achieve political power, such as revolution coups. For example, UNP and SLFP are two Sri Lankan political parties that have attempted to gain governmental power only through constitutional elections. JVP, on the other hand, initiated as a revolutionary party which attempted to gain the power of Sri Lanka through two armed revolutions in 1971 and 1989 and 1980, before turning into a constitutional party in 1994. Left-wing and right-wing parties. This categorization is based on the economic theory. The political parties associated with right-wing parties are mostly capitalistic, while left-wing parties follow a socialist approach. According to some political scientists, there is a third category also as moderate parties. However, most of the political scientists categorize moderate parties either as left-wing or right-wing. For example, in Sri Lanka, UNP and SLFP are right-wing capital-friendly parties, while JVP and all leftist parties are socialist-oriented left-wing parties.
Okay, right. Then we have the political party system categorization. Do you guys have any questions up to this point? Any doubts from this part? Political party system categorization. All right. All cool. Okay, then we have the political party system categorization, which is a larger lesson, and I don't think that we can like discuss that just like that. So political party system categorization and pressure groups and civil society, we shall look into it on next Sunday. Sorry, next Saturday in the next